Good morning, Sarah Ross, and how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Cindy. How are you?
Fine, thank you, and thank you so much for joining me and talking about tips when speaking internationally.
Yes, it's one where the simplest things and the dumbest things can sometimes make all the difference.
The dumbest things and the simplest. So They're not mutually exclusive then? I mean, are they?
No, I've found that sometimes the things you take for granted here in the UK or, across Europe and the US sometimes aren't there when you get to international markets.
Now, tell me a little bit about yourself, because I know you deal internationally quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah. So I used to be Chief Compliance Officer for the emerging markets at a pharmaceutical company. I looked after 50 different countries.
50.
14 time zones.
Ouch.
And basically my job was to make sure that ethics, corruption, code of conduct, the sort of global policies from our company were trained out to these people. So I spent 85% of my time on the road. I was, very high up British Airways frequent flyer list. But we were talking about countries as developed as Malaysia to countries like Nigeria, various places that end with Stan, and I won't even try and say them because even after this long I can't say them properly. But things that you would never even think about came up during those travels.
Oh, wow. So it was really dealing with the real international, all the different cultures that haven't been blended into Western.
Yeah. And,
okay.
simple things like I got stuck to the floor once in Nigeria. They had duct taped all the wires to the floor and it was hotter than usual and the duct tape had started to move around. And I, at the time, spent quite a lot of my time walking across the stage and at one point realized that I could walk no further.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But he actually came and pulled my shoes off the tape.
So one tip is to make sure that what they're using locally is
actual duct tape.
Okay, so let's bring it back to when you're saying about there's what's a normal kind of attitude that people have when they start speaking internationally? Because you see it on virtually every profile, they're an international speaker, but in actual fact, all that means is they've just gone to Isle of Wight or or to France just to give one presentation. What would a truly international speaker kind of recognize, and what's the usual problems you get as an international speaker?
I think when you're speaking internationally, there are things that you want to do and things that you want to say that if you just stood up in front of your normal audience at home wouldn't be an issue. And when you're speaking internationally, there is an element of having to have done some research into local culture. I give you the example of, giving a speech as part of a panel in most of the Asian countries. I'm fairly forthcoming. I'll speak up, but you have to realize that there's a hierarchy on the stage, whether you're told about it or not, as to who's going to speak first and which order the questions go on. And within the room, understanding, where for China or Japan or places like this, understanding where the most important people are in the room, not necessarily to just focus the attention on them, but they are the ones that are going to ask the questions. And if they don't, it's unlikely that anyone else in the room will.
You mean of the audience that are asking the questions? Oh, right. Okay. Is that preferable to a particular culture or a particular kind of part of the continent, or is it just the subcultures?
So any of the Asian countries that you have a hierarchy based on age and age hierarchy over experience, you will find that there are, they will actually bow down to other people before they ask their question, or you'll see them almost look across before they ask a question and actually understand, from their boss or from whoever they respect the most, whether it's appropriate to ask it.
Okay. Do you actually have to spot that? And if you can, is it easy to spot?
I think as long as you're watching the whole room, making your, there's no difference to any other presentation or any other speech, but you're making eye contact, you're noticing who's moving, who's not responding. I always find that it's advantageous to ask the meeting planners beforehand.
So that's one of the tips then, is we always talk about knowing who's in your audience. You're now saying that when it's an international audience, actually asking that level more of who's the decision makers, who are the people not to upset.
And depending who actually hired you. So if the meeting planner hired you on a brief of they need a motivational speaker, you may not have had an awful lot of contact with the company. But if the company's hired you, then it's even more important that you've asked the questions about who's in the audience, what level are they, is there any particular objective from the meeting, so that you are tying in very much to their understanding of why you're there as well.
Okay. Well, we've getting some lovely comments at the side. Ricky's loving how you're using the pauses. Now, is talking a lot of internationally, is that also retaught you on how you're now communicating in general, that you're now doing more pauses and slowing down everything? Because I know we've spoken before. And
I spent 6 months in Japan working on a project where we had translators with us from 9 till 5 every single day. And I think that taught me how much slang I used to use. Slang, or just expressions that aren't necessarily easy to translate. And I would quite often, from my translator, be given a piece of paper with a big question mark on it. And that was her way of saying, I have no idea what you just said or how I'm supposed to translate it.
Okay.
And I came back from Japan very much aware of how fast I used to speak. And when you spend that amount of time really concentrating on making sure that you're understood and making sure that they have understood what you said, then your way of talking, your way of presenting changes.
Right. And how would you say that it's changed your way of presenting then?
I'm no longer worried about filling the time.
That's why you're quite comfortable with the pauses?
Yeah.
And how are you finding that now culturally, coming back and talking to people like me? It's kind of, actually, she stopped talking.
I think with anything, there's not enough pauses in any of our communication. And what Japan taught me and what Vietnam taught me is that if you actually listen to what people say, the conversation is much more richer for you having listened properly. And that's more a case of not going in with a list of questions and saying, right, question 1, I've got an answer. And then immediately going to question 2 so that you're prepared to ask question 2, but actually listening to the answer for question 1.
Okay.
And make sure that you deal with it fully. And so from a speech topic, when I've spoken internationally, normally I would have questions at any point. But if we finished a big chunk, or we finished a point that I've wanted to make, I've always stopped and, asked if there's any questions at that point. Because there's really no point going 45 minutes, 90 minutes of a speech if they've understood nothing that you said from minute 3. If you checked after 10 minutes and they say, could you slow down? Or what did you mean by this? Then it's a chance to just recalibrate your audience and make sure that they're actually with you.
Now, is there any tips and tricks for recalibrating the audience and checking that they're with you? Because I know from my own experience, I was giving training to some Chinese, and I kept saying, do you understand? Are you with me? I kept on asking those questions where I kept getting a yes back. It wasn't until about an hour in when they said, well, we're saying yes because we're listening to your question and we're answering, yes, we heard your question, but actually you're going too fast and everything else. So it kind of floored me because I thought I was asking the right question. Is there a way to get around, like a basic tip on getting around those, how to ask the right questions?
I think just an awareness that they will often say yes because they think you want to hear yes.
Oh.
And so making sure your answer doesn't have a yes, no, or, open questions. So they have to actually say more than yes and no.
Gosh, you're going to have to make me think then. Can't do that.
Well, they will often say yes to things even if they can't deliver or they don't understand. And therefore, the first thing they say is yes, I would always just check with another question. And if they insist that they've understood and whatever, then there's not a lot you can do. But like I said, having these multiple recalibration points with them just means that you've tried. And hopefully, they can actually pick it up later on in the questions that they come back and ask you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It also goes to the cultural piece. I found in China and some of them, you have to be aware that some of them are going to be asleep.
They actually go to sleep?
They will look like they're asleep. They listen best when they close their eyes.
But that's what they get told off in the Houses of Parliament, that they're closing their eyes to listen, and they're asleep.
But there's no one in your audience telling your Chinese counterparts to wake up or to keep their eyes open. They listen better if they close their eyes because they're retraining their senses to sound instead of the visuals. And the other thing is, a lot of these people, you have to understand, have had huge long commutes into the city. And so some of them are actually just tired.
They are actually tired.
And it can be quite disconcerting the first time you do it when half your audience is asleep.
So don't take offense to it.
Don't take offense to it and just deliver the speech to whoever's got their eyes open. The majority of them will actually take in a lot more than you think, even if you think they slept through the whole thing.
Okay, that's useful to notice. But does your interpreter help at that particular point? And do they make your topic sound better? Or what's the best way of working with them to get the maximum best effect for you?
If you're using simultaneous translation, so everyone in the room has a headset, the first thing is you have them explain the headset to you. Because you won't be wearing it for the majority of the time, but if somebody asks a question, you need to be wearing the headset, so they'll translate the question for you and then translate back your answer.
Right.
The other thing is your translator can give you a rough idea of how much time you'll lose for the translation. So there are times in Japanese where I say yes, and the answer takes 5 minutes to translate. And
from a simple, literally yes, because that's always kind of like a bit of a comedy routine that you see on television, that they say yes and then blah, 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 blah.
And then the other way around, that they give an answer for 3 minutes, and all you get is no. They don't do that. You put an awful amount of trust into the translators, but they can tell you, just from a language point of view, that English to French or English to Vietnamese is there's roughly a 20% difference. And that's also one of the reasons for the pauses, is so that you say a couple of sentences, but if you realize that they're still translating, you stop and just I always let them catch up. Especially if I'm going on to something important. Making sure that they're starting, from a good place.
Right. Okay. Well, we have Ian with us. Ian is from Down Under, so we are now being international, and you're speaking internationally.
Hi, Ian.
Hi there. We're international speakers, just like that.
Yeah. That's all it takes.
Well, Sarah is actually based out in Basel at the moment, aren't you, in Switzerland?
Yes.
So
good old Basel. Thanks to all of our banking systems on Basel, I got it.
Yes, indeed.
And I love the point from Sol where he says his wife just yells the Japanese a little louder. So sort of like, I think that seems to be a bit of a British joke as well, isn't it? Go to a different country, just shout louder if they can't understand you in English.
But also understanding that for them, there are some cultures where once the voices get raised, that's actually them engaged. It's not them angry or having some sort of conflict. That's just how it gets once they're actually involved in the conversation.
No, they do get louder.
They get very
Yeah.
No. Hang on, your sound dropped out there, Ian.
I said they get very excited.
Get very excited. You made some good comments earlier about with the pauses and stuff.
Yes, I haven't spent 6 months in Japan like Sarah has, which would be an amazing experience. But in my very early years of working, I had the luxury of going to Hong Kong to teach a technical course in IT to people from Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan in one room. Mm-hmm. And there was no translation opportunity. So, luckily, it was for a large multinational, so English was the language of choice. But I learnt very quickly that the first answer is just the very top layer. It may be, yes, I understood, or it may be even, yes, I understand that concept, but you need to dig deeper. And because it was a technical training course, I think we ran for 7 days, it was really a case of peeling the onion. So starting with the simple bits and have them practice it and have them show me what they'd done, because I wasn't sure what was translating upstairs, because they're translating into their own tongue and then implementing and then translating on the way out and then back to me. And that was a challenge, and I learned a lot about their cultures in the process. For 7 days, you're living together. But I found over time some fantastic websites that told me a lot about the cultural amours that exist with each culture. You know, when should you shake hands and when shouldn't you? And all those sorts of things that start not half an hour into the presentation or an hour in, but when you met them at the door, and perhaps in how you gave them instructions in the first place, because we were starting at 9 a.m. and as Sarah was alluding to, they seem to sleep a bit, but partly they have a nighttime eating culture. They don't go to bed till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, so 9 o'clock starts were just not on for them. So we quickly adapted. Day 3 was a 10:30 start, and we'd go through to 7 p.m. And that's just how we learned to adapt that very first time back in 1990, I think it was, or 88.
Okay, well, you've got a very good big thumbs up from Simon on the side, saying absolutely right. There's a difference between understanding and understanding. That applies to subnational audiences too.
Absolutely. And it's a good lesson, as Sarah's learnt, to do in your own local environment too. There's no guarantees that their efforts to nod that you've said the right things means they really understand. So I'm looking for them to show me somehow.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the quickest way and the best tips to actually getting them to show you? Because it's all very well. Sorry. An exercise. Yeah.
I plan an exercise. Here's what I use: a format structure where I'm going, why are we doing this? Here's the facts you need to know. And at the end of that, I show a little bit of a case study, and I get them to do a case study somehow. So it might be a work group activity where I don't need to be involved. They can chat away and solve it, but they can come back and explain to the group what they've done. And then you can intervene, and hopefully between 4 groups, for example, 1 or 2 might get it right. And you can show them as an example, and they'll all, now we get it, do it again the next day. And do that reinforcement every day.
Okay, well that kind of works when you're obviously dealing with like one kind of culture. But what happens if, like with Sarah, you've had to deal with, you said 50 different countries. And if you get a complete mixture, especially, I guess there's another culture which must be opposite to the Asian.
Yeah, and I think, what Ian's saying comes up more and more now with, speaker requests being that it is interactive, that it's not just you stood talking for 45 minutes, 90 minutes, that you actually engage with the audience in certain ways. Now, it can be asking questions or, more of a sort of survey style that you see them actually answering the questions and the results come up on the screen or something. But when you have the mixed cultures, you kind of have to get the balance between them. I tend, if I can, not to have them sat in their country groups. I'll actually get them, if there's a workshop, actually get them to move around so they work with different people. But to what Ian was saying there, when you get them to do an exercise or you get them to have a bit of a discussion, or you've put worksheets in the whatever booklets that they've been given, that you actually give them a chance to speak about it. And come back, because sometimes the biggest learnings for them are one group will have understood it perfectly and have got the answer, but there'll still be a group that didn't. And just they can then speak to each other. And I have in times actually told the translators, I don't need you to translate this piece. Just let them, almost let them vent.
Okay. Right. So that actually brings me on to the next point, because you said at the beginning you've had to deal with sort of like non-traditional methods of doing business in your experience. Have you had to come across any of those when doing speaking, where you kind of have to play more of not the traditional way of doing business to actually get your message across?
I was stood in a group of 300 people and was asked why our global policy was discriminating against Africa. And yeah, you realize that your global policy doesn't have any colored people included in the pictures, or the diversity and inclusion that you've spent years doing doesn't work in the country that you're in.
Ouch.
There are times when the message that you're giving is something they don't want to hear. And there will always be somebody who, heckles or, has questions, trying to take things off topic or whatever. And, it's about being, I suppose almost stubborn to the point of you were paid to give a certain message. And at the end of the day, that's the message that you were paid to give. But understanding that sometimes those conversations that take it off topic give a much deeper learning. I was, trying to explain ethics to a group in Africa. And actually one of their suppliers came up with an example that was so much better than anything I had in my presentation, because he just, he was using local knowledge and he was using local terminology about what the market really was and what it really did. Mm-hmm. And that enhanced the learning for everybody in the group. So yeah, it's not always easy when the hard questions come and you're really having to stick to your position. But at the end of the day, they're paying you because you're the expert, or they're putting you up there to deliver a message. And sometimes it can be because they don't want to deliver it themselves.
Now, how would you know if that is what you're walking into? Because that's the one big thing when you're going abroad to a different environment, where if you're not up on what the local politics is happening, you're not going to be aware of what's happening at the company level there, and possibly have no ins. Because I don't know about you, but here in the UK, if I'm going somewhere, I'll ask somebody if they've had any dealings.
Yeah.
So I'm not going in totally blind. Is there any way that when you are going internationally that you can actually try and do some research so you're not quite so blind?
There are speaker associations all around the world. And I think with all of these, it's reaching out to peers and saying, is there anything I should know about the actual company itself? Unless you've been given access to the board or the management team that you're dealing with, it could be difficult to do that. I always ask whether there's any expats.
Okay.
in the environment. That was generally, there was a couple in most of the places that I spoke. And they'll generally tell you what they're finding difficult. Now, it might not be on topic, but you get a good enough understanding from them saying they don't listen, they're not interested, they just want, they don't even want to go to this meeting because of X, Y, and Z. Then you can actually build in, right at the beginning, look, I realize that some of you don't think this topic is important, or you wish you were back at your desk because you've got 500 emails to deal with, or even just to the point of what happened at work last week. In pharmaceuticals, we could literally go from, everything running smoothly to a recall within 24 hours. So, also taking into consideration that some of them might have work to do that is actually more important than being in that room, and actually just giving them space to do that. So if you are just before the break, making sure you finish on time, just being aware that they need the full 15 minutes to go and deal with whoever is on the other end of the BlackBerry that's been ringing incessantly, and just, just accepting that they're human.
But that's a very good tip about with the expats, because I guess you can actually bring in some of the stuff that if they are showing that they've got a problem or issue or two, then do you actually try and help them during your presentation or afterwards, or do you sort of like just help create the door so at least they know where they can go to afterwards, or that, right, okay.
I will always be around after the presentation, after the speech. I'll try and stay for at least one meal with them, whether it's culturally, important to stay and have with them with the meal, or just so that you have a chance to spend more time with people who have questions but wouldn't ask in the room, that they can come and ask you, or that you can do the courtesy things like they will hand you business cards, and so that you don't insult anybody, that you take the time to take the card, and
now the card. The card. You must have lots of tips about how to handle the business card with different countries, because I've heard all sorts of things like, okay, in China you take it with two hands, and then depending on what's on the card is whether you're a privileged person or whether you're just it's a token thing to do, and not to write on the back of cards, but others is please write on the back of the cards.
It's probably one of the first things I would check if I was going somewhere new. And so, check all the time. What is, business card etiquette? Should the cards stay on the table? Should it still be visible?
Oh, crikey.
Difficult, when you're a speaker, you're obviously going to have them in your hand. But if they've come up to you before the speech and done the exchange of cards, which is, happens if you're after a break or after lunch, then actually the cards remain visible on the table.
Even when you're speaking?
Even when you're speaking.
Oh my, okay.
And if you have, and this is the more difficult one, because you will never quite know whether you got the hierarchy right, but if it's obvious that somebody is more important than somebody else, or other people are being, almost bowing down to this person, that person's card should be at the top.
So you have to actually do a hierarchy on your table then?
Yeah.
Right, okay, I can see I would actually walk into that one quite happily.
Other than that, it is, it's about being respectful and, following up with them. I usually just drop emails to them afterwards if I don't have enough cards with me, or if I didn't take cards or something like that. It's more, emerging markets and, different cultures, as we get to the point sort of in the Western world of almost doing away with business cards as such an important business tool. There are other cultures that haven't. That's still going to be part of their culture for a very long time. And therefore, you may never give a card out, I know, in Switzerland, but actually in Japan or China, you would need to go with at least 200 cards because they'll all want one. Okay.
And Ian was making an appointment to say to do it with raised text as well.
I've seen a lot of different cards, and And yeah, raised text or on both, they will have them printed on both sides. So I always found it, because they would hand it to me with the English up, I would always turn it over so that I could actually see what was on the other side. Now, I can't read Japanese, but at least I can acknowledge that their name is not whatever it is on the front. Remembering that some cultures, especially China, will have given them Western names.
Yes.
Corporate culture has English as the thing. So I actually, when I was living in Japan, I actually had a roommate who was Chinese. We worked for the same company, and her Western name was Iris. But it was only after a couple of months when I actually found one of her business cards that it turned out her name was Ben.
Yep. No, I understand that. On the one of the courses I went on, we had a Mr. Wei, and all the Chinese would bow down to him and call him Mr. Wei. And unfortunately, he picked the English name of Ray, but could never say the R, so it also came out as Wei. So we just used to call him Highway, which you can imagine some jokes. But it actually turned out he was a high-level general in the Chinese army sent over to do the course that we were on. Nice. But it was, again, it's our first understanding of difference in culture, because all the Chinese were bowing down to him and giving him like a slight sort of like hello, kind of very respectful, and us kids were kind of going high five, you know. But I guess it broadened his understanding as well, that we didn't mean it disrespectfully. It was our own way of being respectful. Yeah. But Simon's actually brought up a very good question of, with the business cards, how do different cultures deal with novel cards then? I know over here, people try and do something which is different.
My experience was always the company logo and the company details are the most important. And therefore, you know, it could be on plain white card. You know, they weren't, ours were plain white card with our details on, and the logo in the corner. I wasn't aware that raised text was actually, you know, detected status by that. I think that's good to know when you're being handed them, to make sure that you're making the right gestures to the right people, in terms of spending the right amount of time with the right people in the group. Hopefully somebody would have made you aware of, you know, who those people were beforehand, but yeah.
So how much is the right amount of time?
I always tried to do it with eye contact, direct, you know, 60% of the answer to whoever was the highest in the group, but still engage with everybody. Just, you know, a few extra seconds looking at one person cements their position, but also shows that you've understood where they are in the group. And also just, you know, if somebody that you sense is fairly junior has asked a question, then, you know, I have opened the question to the other people in the room, so that they almost get the chance to put the person in their place or answer it from their perspective, and then you add comments to the end of it if it's not clear.
In that case, I'm going to lead with an awkward question. Have you ever got it wrong? And how do you come back from that? Because is there a way to come back, or do you never come back so you just don't get it wrong in the first place? Or do they understand when you're international that you could have a bit of a faux pas?
My experience was that when we had the translators with us 9 to 5, it was pretty difficult not to get it right, in the sense because they were pointing it out to you. If you're in a more open environment, then they will, you know, if there's not somebody there telling you or introducing you, and it is, you know, the same as it would be in the UK, you just walk up to people. They're not expecting you to get it 100% right. If they can see that you are making an effort, and this has always been my thing. I'm, you know, with 50 countries to look after, I was never going to be fluent in enough languages. to be able to do anything in those countries. But I could at least make the effort to say hello, thank you, please, and goodbye. And I think it's the same with that. If you at least show that you respect their country and their position enough to at least have introduced yourself in the right way, or, you know, understood that they will be introduced first, or you, if you say something that you can at least try and say, my name is, or something in that language, then you get a lot more respect and a lot more collaboration from them than if you just assume that they're going to speak English.
Okay, so it's coming back down to that internationally, respect and authenticity are still key things. And it doesn't matter whether you're working with somebody who speaks your own language, it seems to be even more important the more that they don't speak your language then.
Yeah, and I guess the way to see it is if they're going through simultaneous translation, they have no relationship with you. You know, they're making eye contact, but what you're saying and what they're hearing at that, they could be, 20 seconds difference. And so it's almost being aware that the eye contact, engaging the group, being yourself on stage, is actually the most important thing. And therefore, when they come to speak to you afterwards and having the opportunity to do that, that is actually the first time they're engaging with you. And it may be directly, and they may have the translators, float around the room or come with you so that you can have those conversations. But actually understanding that they don't take as much personally from what you've said in your speech.
Right. So that's coming back down to, again, that the translators might take 5 minutes to translate your simple yes.
Yeah.
And having the respect enough to let the translator finish then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's easy if it's, and this goes, it depends which country you're in, depends which system they'll be using. Now, if it's one where it's just one earpiece, like you see at sporting events, I will tend to continue to wear it throughout the speech. If it's not, and it's ones that look like a child's stethoscope that have to go in both ears, then it's pretty difficult to actually wear that and still be able to talk normally, in which case I tend not to. But if you can see the translation booth, which you not always can, then I'll ask them to give me a signal if they have a long piece that they need to translate.
Oh, no, that's a very good tip. That is a very good tip. How would you know if there's a long piece, as in you've given them a long piece, or?
Yeah, normally I would speak for no more than 2 or 3 sentences and let them, and they're translating at the same time. But if they have something and they need to explain it because it doesn't translate literally or it's difficult to follow, then I will actually, have them raise a piece of paper so that I can at least see visually that this is going to take a bit longer.
Okay, so does that mean that even before I get out there, I might have to relook at the structure of my speech, my presentation, and kind of deconstruct it to reconstruct it into paragraphs then in suitable size-wise chunks?
Yes.
Ouch. So how would I do that when I actually speak from the hip most of the time?
I think it's not about rewriting or restructuring. The speech is primarily the same. Mm-hmm. It's about understanding that story that maybe in English you can tell for 5 minutes and whatever. You need to just be clear about what the learning points are from it, and how you're going to deliver those. And then actually, how does that story break up? So in that sense, if there were things that were going to be slightly longer, I would actually, get there early, speak to the translators, and so that they understand at what point it's going to be. I've given them an outline of my speech before, where there are stories, where there are facts, just so that they understand, what it is they're going to be translating.
Okay, so that's, yet again, it's coming back down to working with the translator with jokes and humour then. So taking the slang out and making sure that they actually understand the point you're trying to make, I guess.
Yeah. If you are using a slide deck, you're using PowerPoint, I usually have it in the translated version on the wall, and my laptop has the English version. But I always get somebody else to check that it is synchronized in terms of the bullets are in the same order on my slides as they have been translated into the other language. If you have the luxury of time, then I would have it double translated, which basically means from their language into English and then, or English into their language and then back again. So you can actually see where there might be any issues.
Okay, now you remind me of that old, was it when I was doing one of those translation programs, and they took the old adage of the mind is strong, but the flesh is weak, and they translated and it came back like the vodka is good, but the meat is rotten.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, yeah, okay. So that's another good tip of translate it and then get it translated back to see if it comes back similar.
Yeah, and like in that one, yeah, the meaning is the same. But sometimes if it's just been translated literally word for word, it makes no sense whatsoever. And then I would actually sit down and go through and understand what I could take out to make it easier to translate.
Okay, so do you actually work with your translators at that particular point so that they understand the point you're trying to get across, so that they can actually help it, or
it comes down to whether you're putting a deck up onto the wall and have had documents translated, in which case they have copies. I will send them to them in advance and ask them if there's any issues. Whether that's culturally things that I shouldn't be saying, or whether it's things that they don't know how to translate. And then we'll have a discussion. I'll explain the topic to them so that they have more of a context. If it's just a speech and it's simultaneously translated, you may not have that luxury. But just going through it yourself and taking out, things that you think are funny might not always translate. But also just keeping it fairly simple. So shorter sentences, just so that it would be easier for somebody to keep up with you.
Okay, so slowing down, which means that your normal 45-minute presentation is not, you can't do a normal 45-minute presentation. I was told that you have to do like a 30 minutes because then by the time you slow down and spread it out, it's 45.
You can lose roughly a third.
1/3. Okay.
Yeah. And generally, that's going to come out in the translations. You'll probably get the same number of questions. But it's the actual speech that you're giving which will be affected by cutting things out or cutting down on time.
Has there ever been an audience experience where having an outside speaker or an international speaker has not been the right thing, but you've been brought in to give an international flavour when in actual fact it's kind of missed the point and shouldn't been there?
I've had examples where I wasn't the right person to give that speech. It needed to come from somebody in the organization at the time. I've also, when I was working in the corporate world, I turned up to give a speech just after an announcement was made that half of the people were going to lose their jobs.
Oh, ouch.
Of which I knew nothing apart from what had just been given to me in a briefing note before I got on a plane. And so in those situations, you're not the right person to be there. They should have probably cancelled the event that they were planning to do and done something different instead. In that case, I've offered my time afterwards. I've cut short the presentation, so that there is more chance for questions. I mean, I can always say that I'll take it away and find an answer for them. But if the sense of the room is, when is she going to mention the closure, or when is she going to do this, then it doesn't matter what I say about ethics or teamwork or anything. They are preoccupied with finding out some more information for them. And so, back to what we said before, if it's been a global announcement, then, you should know about it. If there's been something internal, and you generally get that feel even before you get up to speak, that they're just not,
So the tip of talking to expats before you get there, having one or two friends in the camp, as they say, before you get there, because the last thing you want is obviously what you've already alluded to, which is being invited as a relative stranger to come in and give news that actually they don't want to give themselves, dropping you in it, which being out from outside of the circle, you wouldn't know if that's what you're doing or not. So it's back to being even more vigilant with your bog standard questions of who's in the audience, why am I doing this, what's the background story, what is it you're trying to get from the audience, basically, but just looking that little bit more than you normally would if it was a domestic audience. Yes.
And almost asking the questions, why are you having an external speaker to do this? If if they've given you a brief and it's still fairly company specific, now that may be about their values and behaviors or things like this, which is fine. But if you do get that sense that you're being set up, or that there's something else, it's about asking those questions until you're happy that you've understood what it is that they want, and then being flexible when you're up on stage to when you're set up completely.
Yes. Now, I know a few conference organisers that have been misleading, and it isn't until you're actually on the stage that the penny finally drops that something bad has just happened, and you're the light entertainment or the deflection from that.
Yeah. Whilst the person who should be in the room is not in the room, or along those lines.
Now that's a very good point. If you've done all your homework, you know who the person who's supposed to be in the room and who everyone's supposed to be taking their cue from, and they're not there, how do you actually deal with that on the day that you've actually trying to spot them, you're trying to room spot, you're knowing that nobody will ask a question to that guy's there? Does the room dynamics actually change enough that you can carry on, or do you actually have to physically wait until the person comes, or what's the best etiquette?
If you're in a culture where hierarchy is key, then I would always ask the question, is everybody here? If they've introduced you and brought you up onto stage, then I take it that I'm allowed to start. And if the person you were really expecting isn't in the room, then I would probably, just actually ask the question. Because it shows that you understand that there was somebody important not in the room, but it just allows you to make sure that your understanding is correct. That Mr. Yashimoto is, the one you've been talking to, but he's not there. I will turn to the meeting planner and say, is Mr. Yashimoto is he joining us, or is it okay for me to start? It's being deferential to whatever you've learnt during that initial stage,
Mm-hmm.
And if he never turns up, then the dynamics will be different, because you take out the top of the pyramid and suddenly the next layer down are the most important, and they either have the company message or don't, and therefore without the top guy or the top lady, you may get different questions. So, yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty much just the same. It's just understanding that small difference, though, and making sure the business cards are in the right order. And okay, would you actually remove the business card of the top guy if you had that beforehand? No, still wouldn't move that. Even if he's not there in the room, you'd still have it in the order as if you're looking at the company hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's a useful tip.
I certainly wouldn't knock it off the table into the bin, or
put it in the bag out the way, or into the pocket
so that I can sit on it next time. That's very respectful.
Well, they don't get upset if you're actually sitting on a business card, then, do they?
I've never put it in my back pocket, because before I went to Japan, I was told that business cards were were part of the person, and therefore you treated them with the utmost respect. And that was ingrained in me so hard during that training that it was like, no, I would, yeah.
So is that one of the biggest tips, or what would you say is the biggest tip that you learnt before you went and has actually given you the best response, or is one of those, I'm so glad somebody told me?
I think the business cards, because even though they appreciate you don't have the same rules, to be able to show that you do respect their traditions. Also just being able to respond to their questions, being polite, asking them to explain it if you really haven't understood it. And if it's something you can't answer, then, not trying to fudge the answer, just, I would love to find out the answer to that for you. And actually, either find the person afterwards or ask the person to come and find you so that you can take their details. I think just shows, that you're not just there to answer the question and run.
Okay, well, we've got some lovely, useful links from Ian on the side with business card tips. So thank you very much for that, Ian. And I love Simon's kind of question, because I totally get where he's kind of coming from. And I've seen this where speakers have gone in and they actually then feel that they are part of the top hierarchy because he's supposed to be the expert. Is there that kind of bit where you're supposed to be subservient, or sort of like show that you're as equal to or a peer of, or is there like a special way that you don't then devalue your knowledge? My understanding and my experience across the countries is I've never been included in the hierarchy, but I've always been given the utmost respect. Now, I think at 5'10" and a technically Western management level, then I've been given a certain level of hierarchy within the group anyway. My Chinese peer at the time was treated abominably. I mean, she was treated like a slave by the same group of people that would treat me like they would senior management, in terms of how they treated me, how they spoke to me. And so I think it's, yes, you are there as an expert, but unless you've been part of their company, you will never be part of the group. You will always be the outsider, or, a lot of these cultures like to just label you the foreigner. And that's where it comes from. It's, you are given your position of being an expert, but you're not included within the hierarchy of the company because you're not Japanese or you're not Chinese, and you haven't earned that role or that level in terms of their culture. Okay, so it's coming back down to, as long as you're respectful, then it's irrespective of your own standing, it's how you treat others.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, just as an example, and it's not about speaking. We used to take the subway in Tokyo, and we would see children every morning going off to school, and they would get into the carriage with us, and if there was a spare seat, they would actually offer us the seat as foreigners before pointing it out to a senior child. A sort of, I would have guessed the same as our high schools, 10, 11-year-olds were getting on in the morning, looking around the carriage to see who was there that was older than them from their own school, and going and saying good morning before they then stood with their friends and just chatted.
Right.
It's ingrained in them from such a young age as to age and experience and, the treatment that's given, that you will not break into that by just doing one speech to them. But being aware that is there, and acting respectfully to everybody, but just giving a little bit more focus to whoever has been identified to you or whoever you've seen is the most important person in the room, goes a long way to just building that bridge.
Okay. No, I see there's lots of other people also on the side agreeing with you, so I best make sure that I don't upset people when I go out that way.
I mean, they don't expect, if their tradition is that they bow to greet you instead of shaking hands, they do not expect you necessarily to bow or to know how low you are supposed to bow. They just want to, but they wouldn't break with their traditions and shake your hand. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. So, does the old adage of "do as the Romans do" when in Rome?
Yeah.
Is that kind of still true?
I think it does still ring true. It's more you're not at home, and it's a case of, you are in a different culture or you are in a different place, and understanding that they have different ways of doing things. I always just take it, pinch of curiosity. How weird could this be? Or, what am I going to learn today that doesn't really sit with what I've been brought up with or what I consider normal, and just take it as a learning. I always, apart from I think once, have always tried to either arrive several hours earlier or the day before, so that I can actually just look, almost view the group, sit in the group, understand how it works, see how they interact at breaks. And then if you can, is to stay after and, like I said, share a meal with them, or at least have a couple of coffee breaks so that you can speak to as many as possible. Because for a lot of the people that you've talked to, it might be the first time that they've, engaged with a speaker or heard that message, and they will have questions, but they don't want to ask a packed room of people. But sometimes they'll ask a question that you think, well, I wish they'd asked that in the group, or, because it would have broadened the experience. But all you can do is then take that for the next time and say, right, I need to concentrate on that point, or I need to, actually look at something else.
Okay. So can you recommend that if we already have lists of questions that we need to ask our organizers,
yeah,
and we do for finding out the audience and stuff, is there a way or a cheat sheet or a tip sheet or anything you can think of that we need when we're actually dealing internationally, that we need to kind of go and ask this? Because there's things like with visas as well, and shots and medicals and this, that and the other, things like that you'd never even think about when speaking abroad, that it'd be nice to actually know, is there anywhere that if I've got to travel abroad, there's like a one-stop shop of, right, okay, go here. Is there anything, or is it just all your knowledge being gained by all the experience of all these countries you've had to deal and fly to and talk to? And
the majority of it is just experience.
Okay.
And also at the time when I started working for a large multinational company. So these things were more passed down from, I won't say generation to generation, but you were told as part of your onboarding for that, for the role that I was doing, you need to go and check all your vaccinations.
Right.
But yeah, I can probably put together a list of things that you wouldn't normally have to think about if people are interested in that. Just, things like you say, vaccinations, visas, that people can actually, almost go through as the packing list.
Okay. In that case, let's just ask quickly, of the people that are in the room, could you just quickly put a number 1 in the sidebar if you're interested in sort of like seeing a quick list of other things to think of when working abroad, or doing a speak abroad, or working internationally, and then we can look at putting a list together afterwards. Just type a number 1 in the bar. There you go. There's Tim. Thank you, Hillary. We've got a couple, so that. I
think there's also probably to be added to that list is the question: if it's important to you, you should be taking it with you. So things like travel adapters. If you use slides, how do you change the slide? not all countries have, presenters tools with them. I always have batteries in my speaker pack, AA and AAA, because invariably whichever thing you're given has been used all day, and just at that minute will die on you. So
yeah,
I've taken weird things with me before. After the duct tape, it was different shoes, but that's and super glue.
Yes. Super glue
fix just about anything.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to give it a wrap it up now. And thank you very much for joining me today, Sarah.
No problem.
And thank you so much for your time as well. And I've loved the tips that you've given. And I look forward to sort of like creating a bit of a sheet with you as well, and having a look at putting that on the website and getting the information out there as well. Very,
Great.
very useful. Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast by the Guild of Speakers. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really does help us to get our message out. If you would like to know more about the Guild of Speakers, go to guildofspeakers.club or scan the QR code below.